You filled the feeder this morning, perhaps before the kettle had even boiled. Out of habit, out of care, out of that quiet satisfaction of knowing something in your garden will benefit from what you've done. The birds came. The blue tit arrived first, the way it almost always does. Everything looked right. What you couldn't see was what you had just put in front of them. Not all of it, not most of it. But somewhere in that feeder, or somewhere in the routine that surrounds it, there's almost certainly something that is doing quiet harm. Not dramatically, not all at once, but in the way that matters most. Gradually and invisibly, in the birds you have spent months learning to care about. This video will show you exactly what it is, and what to do instead. Welcome to Garden Bird Secrets. If you're new here, subscribe, because what you're about to learn will change every morning you spend in your garden. There are 5 things that appear in UK garden feeders every week, some of them placed there with genuine care, some of them recommended by well-meaning sources that got it wrong, that are quietly causing harm to the birds that depend on you. I'll go through all 5. Stay until the 5th, because that one is specific to this time of year. Right now, in May and June, while the blue tits in your nest box are feeding their young, something is happening at feeders across Britain that most garden owners have never been told about. It is the easiest thing in the world to stop, and almost nobody does, because nobody explained why it matters. This is the first video in a series about what is quietly going wrong in gardens like yours across Britain. We begin here, at the feeder, because this is where most of the harm begins. The first, salted and processed food scraps, is the most common of all. The thing you put out without thinking twice. Crisps left over from the weekend, a cracker that went stale, a piece of processed bread with salted butter still on it, table scraps from last night's dinner. These things end up on bird tables and in feeders across the UK every single day, placed there by people who genuinely want to help. The British Trust for Ornithology is explicit on this point. A bird the size of a blue tit, roughly 10 to 11 grams, has kidneys that cannot process sodium the way a mammal's can. The threshold at which salt begins to affect a small bird's neurological function and renal health is far lower than most people assume. It is not a question of whether processed food is ideal. It is a question of whether a small body can cope with what we consider an entirely ordinary amount of salt. And the answer, documented clearly in avian physiology research, is that it cannot. In your garden, this means the distinction between a small amount and a harmful amount is measured in fractions that your eye cannot judge. The safest position, and the one supported by every major UK bird welfare organization, is to treat salt as an absolute exclusion, not a moderation challenge. If you have ever put out table scraps, crisps, or anything salted, this is the one to stop first. The second, desiccated coconut, turns on a distinction that almost no one knows. Fresh coconut, half a shell, hung from a branch or a feeder hook, is one of the best things you can provide for garden birds in the UK. The RSPB recommends it. Blue tits, great tits, and starlings will return to it again and again. It is nutritious, seasonal, and appropriate. Desiccated coconut, the kind sold in supermarkets in plastic bags for baking, is a different substance entirely. When desiccated coconut is consumed by a bird, it does something that takes time to become dangerous. It absorbs moisture from the bird's digestive system and begins to expand. In a small bird, this expansion, occurring inside a body cavity that has no room to accommodate it, causes a blockage that the bird cannot recover from. The RSPB includes desiccated coconut on its list of foods that must never be offered to garden birds, for exactly this reason. In chicks, the outcome is faster and worse. The two things look similar. That is the problem. One comes in a shell, the other comes in a packet. The difference between them is not visible once they're in the feeder, but in your garden, this means the difference between a food source and a risk that is entirely invisible until it is too late. Fresh coconut half, hung out for the birds, good. Desiccated coconut from a baking packet, never again. The third, white bread and most processed carbohydrates, is the most complicated to explain, because it isn't poisonous. And that is precisely what makes it difficult. Bread does not kill garden birds the way some other things on this list can. This is why it has persisted on bird tables across Britain for generations. It doesn't cause immediate harm, so the assumption has been that it causes no harm at all. The British Trust for Ornithology has been working for years to correct this assumption. The problem with bread is nutritional. White bread is almost entirely carbohydrate. It contains no meaningful protein, no calcium, no essential fatty acids, and none of the vitamins a wild bird requires to function. When a bird eats bread, it satisfies its hunger, its body registers fullness, and then stops seeking out the insects, seeds, and invertebrates it actually needs. It has eaten. It is not nourished. For an adult bird in winter, this is serious. For a blue tit feeding chicks in May, it is something worse. A blue tit parent visits the nest box between 500 and 1,000 times a day during the feeding period. If a significant portion of what it carries back is nutritionally empty, the chicks receive the calories to survive, but not the protein and calcium to develop. The BTO has documented this effect, and it is not subtle. In your garden, this means the feeder is meant to supplement what your garden naturally provides, not replace it with something that looks like food, but functions like an empty meal. A small amount of whole grain bread, occasionally, in winter, when other food is scarce, is very different from bread as a regular offering. What you put in the feeder in May is not a winter decision. The fourth, moldy or improperly stored peanuts, is the one I want you to pay the most attention to. You cannot see this one. That is what makes it the most serious. Peanuts are one of the most valuable foods you can provide for garden birds. The RSPB recommends them. The BTO recommends them. Blue tits, nuthatches, great spotted woodpeckers, and greenfinches will visit a peanut feeder consistently throughout the year. There is nothing wrong with peanuts. There is something wrong with peanuts that have been stored incorrectly. And most people cannot tell the difference. When peanuts are exposed to moisture, in a damp kitchen cupboard, in a bag left open, in a feeder that isn't checked regularly, they become a host for a mold called Aspergillus. This mold produces a compound called aflatoxin. Aflatoxin B1, the most common variant, causes irreversible liver damage in birds. It has no color, it has no smell. You will not see it on the surface of the nut. The nuts will look fine. Research in avian toxicology has established the mechanism clearly. Aflatoxin binds to DNA in hepatic cells, disrupting normal liver function in a way that accumulates over time. A bird visiting a contaminated feeder regularly will not show obvious symptoms until the damage is already severe. The BTO recommends buying peanuts exclusively from wildlife food suppliers, not supermarket baking aisles, because suppliers certified for wild bird feeding maintain aflatoxin testing that standard food retailers do not apply. Store them in a cool, dry container. Replace what's in the feeder before it has time to sit in British weather. In your garden, this means the cost difference between certified peanuts and supermarket peanuts is negligible. What it protects against is not. And never, under any circumstances, offer roasted or salted peanuts. That is the aflatoxin risk plus the sodium problem in the same nut. The fifth is different from everything before it. Stay with me, because this next part changes everything. This is the point that matters most right now. Not in autumn, not in winter. Right now in May, while the blue tit is visiting your nest box, while the chicks are inside waiting, while the parents are making that journey between feeder and nest box 500 times a day. Whole peanuts, not moldy peanuts, not salted peanuts. Whole peanuts, the kind sold correctly in the right mesh feeder, exactly as they should be offered to adult birds in every other month of the year. During nesting season, a whole peanut becomes something a blue tit parent will carry back to the nest and attempt to feed to a chick. A blue tit chick, in its first days after hatching, is approximately the size of your thumbnail. Its throat is open and waiting. It cannot judge the size of what arrives. It cannot refuse. It cannot signal distress in a way the parent understands. The British Trust for Ornithology is direct on this point. Whole peanuts, carried to the nest during the fledgling period, are a documented cause of chick mortality. Not a theoretical risk. A documented one, recorded through the BTO's Nest Record Scheme, which has been tracking what happens inside nest boxes across Britain for decades. The parents do not know this. They are bringing what they found at your feeder because your feeder is reliable and close and trusted. They have made your garden part of their world. They have extended something that functions very much like faith in the safety of what you provide. The solution is a mesh peanut feeder, specifically a feeder with a mesh opening of no more than 6 millimeters. Through this mesh, adult birds can extract small fragments of peanut. They cannot extract a whole nut. What arrives at the nest is a fragment, not a hazard. I want to be precise about how simple this is. A mesh peanut feeder costs less than a cup of coffee. You likely already own one. The change required is to use it from April through to July, instead of the open feeder you use in winter. That is the whole intervention. Everything the blue tit needs from the peanut is still available. The risk disappears. If you've ever stood in your garden and felt genuinely watched, you were not imagining it. The birds in your garden have extended trust to you. They have incorporated your feeder into the structure of their days, their seasons, their family. What you put in that feeder travels further than the feeder. It travels to the nest box. It travels to the chicks. It determines what happens inside the most private and vulnerable part of their year, a part of their lives they cannot protect without you. The mesh feeder costs less than a cup of coffee. What it protects cannot be replaced. And here, after all 5, is what to put in your feeder instead, right now, in May. Sunflower hearts, the kind without the husk, are the single most recommended food for UK garden birds across every major wildlife organization. They are high in fat and protein, produce no waste, and are suitable for chicks when fragments are carried to the nest. Niger seeds suit goldfinches and siskins, small, oil-rich, and only accessible to birds with the right bill shape, which makes waste minimal. Suet cakes and balls provide the high-energy fat that blue tits and long-tailed tits need through spring and into summer. One note: remove the plastic mesh netting before hanging them. The netting is designed for transport, not for bird feeding. Birds' feet and bills can become caught in it. Mealworms, dried or live, are particularly valuable right now. Robins and blue tits rely on them, and during nesting season, they provide the protein that bread cannot. The RSPB specifically recommends mealworms during the spring feeding period for exactly this reason. And peanuts, in a mesh feeder, from April through July, not from the baking aisle, from a wildlife supplier, stored dry, changed regularly. Your feeder can be one of the most important things in your garden. It already is for the birds that depend on it. What you put inside it determines whether it is a benefit or a harm. And now you know exactly where the line is. Tell me what you've been putting in your feeder and what you're going to change. Tell me if you have a nest box and whether you can hear the chicks from where you stand in your garden. Tell me what the blue tit at your feeder looks like this morning, now that you know what it's carrying home. I'll see you in the garden.